Chapter 16. Reunited. I hate to leave you, Lauren said. Through the slight opening of my window curtain, we could see the dawn beginning. The light that cleared away the darkness and gave me hope that something similar would happen to the darkness in me as well. You have to go, Lawrence. I'll be all right now, I said, smiling. I will. Somehow, I said, my eyes shifting as I gazed ahead. I know I will. I wish they wouldn't give you so much medicine. It doesn't seem right, he worried out loud. He leaned over and kissed me softly on my forehead and then smiled. I'll see you later, he promised, squeezing my hand and walking toward the door. He paused to check in the hallway, and moments later he was gone. Robert, I whispered in the silence that followed. It was as if my lips were trying on the word to see if it fit. Robert. I closed my eyes and a series of pictures rolled maddeningly by. I concentrated, slowing them down until I saw my family clearly, heard their voices clearly, the sounds of their laughter, the chatter at dinner, Daddy reading from the Bible, and then Carrie, his name emerged like a bubble right out of confusion. With his name came a litany of his words, his compliments, and his complaints, his warnings and his hopes. A small sailboat bobbed on the surface of a pond. I understood it to be one of Carrie's models. I had memories of him working hard on them, hunched over his table, his soldering gun, his glues, his fingers turning and fitting the miniature parts into their tiny places. I realized I was remembering his workroom. With each memory, each vivid picture, my home was returning. I saw my own room, my stuffed animals, my beautiful, beautiful bed. I saw Mommy in the kitchen making delicious clam chowder. I saw Daddy sitting in his favorite chair reading the newspaper and mumbling over some event. May was at his feet putting a puzzle together, waiting for me to help her do her homework. They were all waiting for me to come home too. Come back. I saw myself running up to the front door and tugging the door when it didn't turn. The door wouldn't open. Why was it locked? I pounded and called, Mommy, Daddy, Carrie. No one came to the door. I turned and looked around desperately, but instead of seeing my front yard, I saw the sailboat. Only now it began to grow larger. The pond became an ocean. Someone was in the boat, steering it toward the shore. He was calling to me, beckoning. The boat drew closer and closer until I saw him vividly. My Robert. Laura, he was calling, come back, Laura. Now I was running down the beach toward the boat, but the more I ran, the further away it became. I ran harder and began to call him. I seemed to run over the same sand repeatedly, never making any progress as he continued to call and to beckon. What's wrong with you? I heard someone ask. Instantly, all my memories evaporated. Mrs. Roundchild stood by the side of my bed with my medication in hand, gazing down at me. Why are you crying? I can remember lots of things now. I remember my family, my home, I said. And I remember Robert and the boat, and that's good. Here, she said, take your medicine. Claire's bringing your breakfast. Maybe I shouldn't take any more medicine now, I said. Now that I'm really remembering things, maybe it's better I have a clear mind. Why is it that everyone wants to be a doctor around here? She asked, almost with a smile. I'm sorry, but do you have to spend a little bit of time in medical school first? I'm not trying to be a doctor, but it just feels right that I shouldn't take anything. Really? Well, up until now, Dr. Scallion has been wrong? Haven't you begun to remember things? Isn't that true? Yes, I said, I suppose. You suppose. Well, I know, and I've been head nurse on this floor for nearly 5 years now, and I've seen many, many different kinds of illness and a number of cases similar to your own. I've seen Dr. Scallion treat them successfully, too. So, I don't have to suppose, she said. Tears filled my eyes once more. I just want to go home, I said. You will if you do what you're told. She paused for a moment, her expression softening. I don't mean to be cruel to you, Laura, but I must be firm. I have an awesome job here. I'm responsible for a number of people who are not able to be responsible for themselves. Many of these people have and will continue to hurt themselves if I don't follow the doctor's orders. There's a lot to do and little time to do it. Everyone needs specialized personal treatment. It makes it hard to waste time. Do you understand? Yes, I said in a small voice. Good, then take your medicine. Dr. Scallion will be here to evaluate your progress, and we'll see what he wants to do after that. With trembling fingers, I plucked the pills out of the cup and put them in my mouth. She handed me the glass of water and I swallowed them down. Very good, she said. Your breakfast is on the way. She left the room moments later. Claire arrived with my tray. She raised my bed and moved the table over to me. I'm getting better, I told her. I'm remembering things quickly now. I'll be able to go home. That's nice. I'd like to have less to do, she said. She paused. But whenever someone leaves the floor or gets moved to the zombie ward, there's always someone else to take their place. I heard they have a waiting list as long as my arm, she added. Can you find out about a patient for me? Can you find out about Megan Paxton? They don't like me asking about patients. If anyone working here is caught talking about patients, they could be fired instantly, she said. I gotta get breakfast to others, she added, before I could plead with her anymore. She quickly left the room. I sighed with disappointment and frustration and began to pick at my breakfast. I ate what I could and then closed my eyes and dozed off. When I woke, my bed had been lowered and my tray taken away. I stared at the white ceiling. Robert's face began to form on the white background. It looked as if he was emerging from a cloud. I saw his soft eyes and his gentle smile. Strands of his light brown hair fell over his forehead. He was laughing, and then suddenly the white background began to whirl around him. His head started to spin along with it, and the white ceiling turned into water. His arm emerged, and his hand reached out for me. Laura, I screamed. Maybe I fainted. Maybe I fell back asleep. I don't know. But when I woke up this time, Dr. Scallion was seated by my bed. He had just taken my pulse, making some notes on a pad. He looked very calm, so calm that I couldn't imagine that he heard me scream. Suddenly I noticed there were two younger men in the doctor's hospital coats standing in front of my bed looking at me. Both carried clipboards. One had dark brown hair and wore glasses. The other had longer light brown hair and light blue eyes. He was taller and wider. Hello, Laura, Dr. Scallion said. This is Dr. Finoff and Dr. Bloom. They're both interns studying with me. Mrs. Roundchild told me you remember a lot about your family and home. Is that so? I nodded. Good. Now let's talk about those memories. Were they all pleasant? I shook my head. I see. What was unpleasant? He asked. I gazed at the two interns. The man with glasses was staring at me so intently I felt self-conscious. I remember there was someone, I said. Someone I cared for, and something happened to him. Yes, Dr. Scallion said. He glanced at the two interns. Neither cracked an encouraging smile nor changed expression. Go on, what happened to him? I think it has to do with the ocean. He was in a sailboat. Yes, go on, he urged, as if he were playing tug-of-war with my mind. I don't know, I think he might have fallen out of the boat. I gazed at Dr. Bloom. Something was softer on his face, and it told me that I wasn't far off. What else do you think, Laura? You must tell me what you remember and what you believe happened. He and I were on the boat, I said. I think we were caught in a storm. Is he all right? Who? Dr. Scallion pursued. Who's the person that was on the boat with you? Robert, I said, and it all tumbled out. Robert Royce, a boy from my school. Dr. Scallion sat back, a look of satisfaction on his face. That's good, Laura, he said, nodding. You've come a long way. But is he all right? Is he? Dr. Scallion fired back at me. I don't know, I can't remember, I cried frantically. He's not all right, he can't be all right. Please, say I'm wrong. Tell me, I begged. You must not think of it as your fault, he said. Why would it be my fault? Was it my fault? What did I do? I demanded. That's enough for now, he declared with finality. He gathered his charts and stood. No, it's not enough. How can it be enough? You've hardly been here 5 minutes. The length of time I'm here isn't what's important. It's what happens during the time I'm here, he said, as if I were one of his interns too. I can't remember everything, but I remember a lot. Can't you help me remember it all finally? I think it's best for you to take one step at a time, Laura. Tomorrow is another day, he declared with a regal air. His 2 interns made quick notes on their clipboards. I want to go home, I moaned. I remember my mother and my father and my little sister and my brother. Why don't they come to see me now? Perhaps they will very soon, he said. Classic case, he said, nodding at me. The 2 interns widened their eyes and pressed their lips simultaneously. As you know, he lectured to them, dissociative amnesia most commonly presents a retrospectively reported gap or series of gaps in recall for aspects of individuals' life history. And illustrated here, these gaps are usually related to a traumatic or extremely stressful events. It's a common battle fatigue syndrome, Dr. Finoff said. Precisely. However, today we're seeing it more and more with early childhood abuse. I'd like you both to keep close observation in this case. They nodded and stared at me. I felt like a amoeba under a microscope. The way their eyes fixed on my face made me cringe. I want to go home, I moaned. We have to deal with patients' perception of the event, Dr. Scallion continued. Again, classic symptoms for classic cases, i.e., mothers who survive accidents when their children don't, husbands or wives who survive, etc. I'm giving her a series of EEG, as you know, he continued in his teacher voice. Regions of the brain that are involved in memory function also affect the stress response. Traumatic stress results in changes in those brain regions. Unfortunately, he continued looking at me, Dr. Sotheby neglected to give her an EEG on admittance, so we lost the comparison that we could have had. But, he smiled at them, we'll make the best of it. He gestured at the door and they turned. Please let me go home, I cried. Why wouldn't they answer me? Our next patient is a more classic case of child abuse. He rattled on as they walked out the doorway. We have a 12-year-old Caucasian male. I watched them leave the room and then I dropped my head on the pillow because I suddenly felt like it had turned to stone. As Dr. Scallion had explained later that day, I was taken for tests. Electrodes were placed on my head to read my brain waves. Mrs. Roundchild permitted me to sit in a chair for a while, as long as I didn't walk around or try to leave the room. I sat there all day thinking about my memories, feeling details fill in, the colors and shapes growing richer and richer with each passing minute. It was as if my recollections, which began as simple line drawings, were now being painted by a wonderful artist. Not only did the pictures and words return, but aroma, scents, and taste it did as well. More than ever, I wanted my mother. I cried for her all day, but no one listened. Every time Mrs. Roundchild or one of the interns appeared, they offered me promises with every hope, with soon. Soon was not soon enough, I thought. Only right now was soon enough, because I became more vocal with my demands. Mrs. Roundchild had me returned to bed and strapped in again. She called Dr. Scallion and claimed that I was about to make a dramatic breakthrough. Once again, they held up the promise that it would all be over soon. I took the pills after dinner and immediately fell asleep. In moments, I was drifting on the sea. I was on the sailboat with Robert, and we were smiling. We were heading for a cove. It was coming back to me with the promise of love and all that lie just around the bend. In my dreams, I saw Robert and this girl who appeared to be me pull the sailboat onto the shore quickly and laughing and teasing each other, go up the beach. I saw her fall to the sand, and then I saw him fall first to his knees, then all fours above her. He gazed down at her, his eyes full of love, and he reached out to touch her hair and her cheek, to let her hold his fingers to her lips, and she would kiss the tips of them. The girl moaned, and the boy leaned over to kiss her softly on the lips, moving his mouth up to her face, over her cheeks and her closed eyes. For a while, he touched her only with his lips. Then he would move along her forehead and her hair. In the distance, the clouds began to gather. Neither the boy or the girl noticed the change in the wind, or the hectic, nervous cries of the birds, or the lift of the water and the tide that rushed in faster and higher. They were completely entranced with each other, mesmerized, lost in the whispers of their own voices, pledging endless love, promising. I saw them undress and peel their clothes away quickly, but not roughly. Naked beneath the sky, they held each other, first gently, wanting their lovemaking to be bigger and greater than it had ever been before, and it was. They closed their eyes and remained intertwined, soon falling asleep. I tried to call out a warning, but they couldn't hear me. The sky darkened, the wind grew stronger. The water rose and fell with a slam against the rocks, and the small sailboat was washed away from the shore. By the time they finally woke, the boat was out to sea. Suddenly, I was no longer the third party. I was on the beach shouting, and Robert was swimming desperately for the boat. I saw it all rushed forward, and I rushed forward to help him. That was when the darkness fell again, slamming my memory closed, ripping the sounds away, leaving me in a terrifying silence. Robert, I called, and I tried to swing my arms out madly until I felt someone holding me and opening my eyes to see Lawrence at my side. "Laura, Laura," he cried. I reached up for him, and he embraced me. "Are you having another bad dream?" he asked. "Maybe the medicine is causing you your nightmares." "I don't know," I sobbed. "I've got to get out of here, Lawrence. They won't..." They don't really want to help me. They're just giving me drugs and making me sleep and weak. I want to go home, Lawrence. I know who my parents are and I know where they live. I remember almost everything. I gotta go home right away. You want to leave the clinic now, tonight, he asked. Yes, desperately. They're turning me into some sort of guinea pig, using me for a study. They want to prolong my treatment for as long as they can. I know they do. I want to go home. Help me, please, I begged. He thought a moment. I pressed my fingers around his firmly. Okay, Laura, I'll help you if that's what you really want to do. Thank you, Lawrence, thank you. I undid the strap around my waist and ripped the blanket away. Lawrence undid the strap on my legs and started to get out of bed. Wait, he said, let me think first. There's no time to think. Get me out of here, Lawrence, please. You need clothes, Laura. You can't go outside like that, he said. I know. When we get downstairs, we'll go to your old room and get something for you to wear. And then we'll go to that door in the kitchen, the one I showed you, he said. Yes, but we gotta hurry. We've gotta be careful, he corrected. If we're caught, they'll surely take more dramatic measures with both of us. He went to the door and peered out. It looks clear, he said. I swung my feet over the side of the bed and stood. For a moment I swayed and nearly fell, but I got a hold of myself. Lawrence took my hand and led me from the room to the doorway. We slipped out quickly and started down the steps. My head was spinning, but I didn't let on how dizzy I was until I slipped on the landing and he had to catch me. You're so weak, Laura. How can you leave the clinic? I can do it, Lawrence. Once I'm away and out in the fresh air, I'll be fine. He held me for another moment, then he guided me to the stairs. Finally, when I got to my room, I went to the closet and found a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, but there were no shoes or sneakers. I had to wear my slippers. Lawrence remained at the doorway with his back to me as I dressed. I paused by the small table and looked at the journal I had been keeping for Dr. Sotheby. No one had bothered giving it to Dr. Scallion. I was tempted to take it with me, but I hesitated. I didn't want my reminders of this place. If I could help it, I thought. I wanted to leave this place behind me for good. I'm ready, I announced. Lawrence looked at me and shook his head. He didn't move. What? I can't let you do this by yourself, Laura. I'm gonna go with you. You're gonna leave the clinic too? Yes, he said. I could almost feel him trembling in the dark. Lawrence had told me that he hadn't been off the ground for years. You don't have to do that, Lawrence. I want to, he said. He watched the corridor and indicated I should be still. Seconds later, we heard talking through the crack and saw Billy and Arnie walk down the corridor. They paused near my door. Billy whispered something to Arnie and they broke into laughter and they continued down the hallway. Now, Lawrence said, we shot out and hurried down the hallway to the cafeteria. Just before we reached the kitchen, the doors opened and a janitor stepped out pushing a pail on rollers. He didn't even look right or left, or he would have seen us with our backs against the wall. I looked at Lawrence. He seemed suddenly frozen against the wall. Should we go now? I asked him. He nodded, but he didn't move. Maybe you should go back, Laura. I don't know if this is the right thing to do. No, he concluded, it isn't. I shouldn't have done this. Please, let's go back, he said. He was trembling badly. I saw how white his complexion had turned. No, I can't go back. I have to leave, I said. I started away and entered the kitchen myself. Moments later, Lawrence was behind me. How will you get home? He asked when we were confronted with the metal door. I don't know. You don't even know which way to go, Laura. This is wrong, he said, seizing my arm to hold me back. Laura. His voice seemed to die away as he pronounced my name. the word falling lower and lower, as if everything he said were being said at the top of a deep well, and I was at the bottom. I felt like I was shrinking. Laura, don't go. Laura, come back. Yes, Robert, I said, I'm coming back. What, Laura? It's me, Lawrence. I went to the door. Laura, wait. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the night, and then I heard him calling again. Laura, come back. Yes, I said, I'm coming, Robert. I'll be there soon. I turned and started around the building. Above me, the sky was thick with clouds. There were no stars, no promises for tomorrow. I stumbled but ignored the pain. I could hear his voice in the wind. Laura, wait, where are you going? You can't get on the highway that way, Laura. Lawrence grabbed me by the elbow and spun me around. Laura, what are you doing? You lost your slipper back there, he said and gave it to me. I stared at it a moment, then at him. I'm going back, I said. Tell my grandmother I'm not going to give him up. What? You're not making any sense, Laura. Aren't you cold? He asked, embracing himself. He looked around us. The weeping willow trees shook in the wind. That wind is wild tonight. There's a storm brewing. Of course there's a storm brewing, I said, but that won't stop us. You can tell her what I said. I slipped my foot into the slipper and continued down the path, past the benches and the gardens. Tell whom, Laura? You're not making any sense. Laura, he shouted. Someone inside the building heard him. A light went on, and then another. I heard the doors opening and the voices calling out into the night. It drove me faster. I was running down the hill now, slipping and sliding, losing my slippers again, but not slowing down. Something inside me told me not to slow down for an instant, or it would be too late. And besides, he was calling louder and more desperately each time. I'm coming, Robert, my darling, I cried into the darkness. Ahead of me, the ocean thundered as the waves slammed against the rocks and the sea spray flew up into the night. My eyes had grown accustomed to the darkness, but the shapes were only silhouettes. I fell and scraped my arm on a rock. It stung, but I didn't pay attention to the pain. Instead, I got back to my feet as quickly as I could and listened. His voice was gone. The ocean was drowning him out. Robert, I screamed. Laura, where are you? The voice seemed to come from behind me. But when I heard it again, this time it was from in front of me. Laura, I'm here. Laura. Yes, Robert, I'm here. I moved more carefully over the smaller rocks until I reached the water and the tide slapping my legs. I could see the boat rising and falling. The small mast was broken and lay on the side. The sailboat was soaked. I started into the water. Robert, I called. Robert. The boat lifted again, only this time it came down on its side and then turned completely over. And after it had, I saw him bobbing in the water with his arm up. Laura. Robert, I'm coming, wait. He disappeared for a moment and I charged ahead, the water now up to my waist. Laura, I heard someone scream behind me, but I didn't turn back. That was Grandma Olivia's trick, to get me to give him up. Don't look back, I thought, or you'll be like the Lot's wife and turn into a pillar of salt. I started to swim toward the boat. His head reappeared. The waves lifted and threw me back, but I continued, swimming as furiously as I could now. I wasn't far from the boat. His head lifted slowly, his eyes, even in the darkness, without a moon and stars, his eyes were luminous and full of love. Robert, I called to him and swam and swam. When I looked up, the boat wasn't any closer. Was it just a strong tide keeping me back? My arms ached, my clothing weighed me down. I treaded water and stripped off my jeans and then my shirt. The tide carried off its bounty quickly, and I turned back to my swimming, putting all my strength into every stroke. I felt myself lift and fall with the water, and when I looked out again, there was a boat, but not any closer. Robert, I can't lose you. I won't lose you. Don't let them take you from me, please. Miraculously, he appeared only inches away, his head emerging from the sea, his arms out toward me. I stretched until our hands joined. Robert, Laura, he said, my Laura. I felt him draw me closer to him until his arms were around me. The water didn't matter anymore. I didn't feel how cold it was or how high it was. In his arms, I felt safe and warm. We kissed. I waited for you, he said. I knew you would come back to me. So I waited for you. I'm so glad, Robert. I'm so happy. I turned toward the shore. Someone was waving madly. He was up to his waist and waving. Let's go back, I said, together. No, Laura, we can't go back, Robert said. Come. He gestured with his head toward the overturned sailboat. Oh, I said. I smiled, understanding. We swam together for a few moments. Then I reached forward to touch the boat. Robert did too. We turned to each other and brought our lips together and kissed as the darkness swept us over. But I was happy, as happy as I had once been. I was with my love forever. Epilogue. The black Rolls Royce climbed the hill to the clinic slowly, rising over the crest of the knoll. The automobile came to a stop in front of the main entrance as the sun was covered by a long dark cloud. The driver got out quickly and opened the door for Olivia Logan. He reached in to take her elbow and she shook him off. I'm all right, Raymond, she snapped. She paused, emerging and looking at the building as if it were alive, and the windows now glittering like mirrors, with dozens of eyes greeting her. Just wait here, she ordered, and made her way to the steps. Raymond watched her obediently for a few moments before getting back into the Rolls. He reached his newspaper and lowered the back of the seat. Before Olivia Logan reached the entrance, the door opened and Dr. Scallion, with Mrs. Clinchner on his side and Mrs. Roundchild on the other, stepped forward to greet her. She paused and looked at them, her eyes full of contempt and accusation. The three seemed to wilt, Herbert Scallion the most. It was as if his clothes were growing on his body. His shirt collar widened and he pressed the knot of his tie between his right thumb and forefinger before reaching out to take Olivia's hand. Where is she? Olivia asked. We have her in the infirmary. I'm sorry, Dr. Scallion began. Olivia put up her black-gloved hand, palm forward. Save your explanations for later, she said. Take me to her. The three separated, Mrs. Roundchild stepping back so Olivia could enter the building. There wasn't anyone in the lobby. The patients were all at lunch. Olivia paused, struck by the silence, and then continued as Herbert Scallion directed her to another door in the corridor beyond. The two nurses trailed behind, neither looking at each other, neither saying a word. The patients are all in the dining room, Dr. Scallion said. Except one, Olivia remarked. He glanced back at the nurses and continued walking. When they reached the end of the corridor, they turned right at the door labeled infirmary. Dr. Scallion opened and stepped back for Olivia to enter. The nurse wearing a name tag, Suzanne Cohen, rose to greet her. Dr. Scallion, with his face, looked as concerned. This is Mrs. Logan, he said. She's here to see Laura. Oh yes, the infirmary nurse, she said. I'm sorry, she added. Olivia closed her eyes and shook her head. I'm not interested in hearing apologies, she replied. Sue Cohen glanced at Dr. Scallion and saw from the expression that they should move quickly. This way, she said, and led them to a rear door. She opened the door and stepped back. Olivia approached slowly and gazed in the steel gurney covered with a sheet on which lay the body of her granddaughter. The room had no particular odor. It seemed aseptic, devoid of any character or light. Olivia approached the gurney. Dr. Scallion moved quickly to get beside her. "Let me see her," Olivia demanded. He lowered the sheet to her neck, and Olivia gazed at her for a long moment. Now that she's here, and they were around her, she would make demands. How did this happen? Dr. Scallion was prepared. Another patient with whom she developed a relationship snuck out and helped her escape down the stairway that we have for employees. He used the door that isn't kept alarmed and showed her a way out of the building. Olivia turned with interest. Home? Then how did she end up in the ocean? "You have to understand," Dr. Scallion said. "This other patient is seriously disturbed young man himself. It has taken enormous effort to get him to be lucid enough to give us sensible details. This entire event put him into regression that—" "I'm not here to discuss him," Olivia said sharply. Dr. Scallion nodded. Apparently, from what I've been able to garner, she heard voices. Voices? What voices? Mainly the voice of her young man, the one who was drowned. Lawrence, that's the other patient's name, said that she kept calling Robert. She said it as soon as she showed her the way out. She turned toward the sea and ran. He tried to stop her, but she was determined. She went down to the ocean and deliberately drowned herself? Olivia asked incredulously. That's not uncommon. Suicidal tendencies in cases such as hers, Mrs. Logan. Then why wasn't she guarded day and night? Olivia snapped at him. She was on our most secure floor. Secure floor? And yet another patient was able to get her and take her away? No one expected. He looked to Mrs. Roundchild, who stepped forward. She was strapped in, medicated. We had just looked in on her. He must have been hiding in the doorway watching, she explained. Send them away, Olivia commanded with a wave of her hand. Dr. Scallion nodded at the nurses and they all backed out of the room. As soon as they had, Olivia turned to him. You know, I could sue this clinic and you for every penny you're worth. Word of this sort of negligence would destroy you, she said, her eyes small but full of fire. Dr. Scallion could barely swallow. He nodded. Olivia held her hateful glare on him like a spotlight, hot and intense. Finally, she turned back to Laura. It's your own good fortune, however. I don't want a word of this to leave this premises. What? But in any death, there's an inquest, reports. It's your problem, she said. I don't want any of this in the newspaper. We're going to give her a proper burial, and that'll be all. This could devastate my family, she added and turned. I won't permit it. I understand. I'll do the best I can. No, you'll do what I ask, not the best you can. She looked at Laura again. We see the results of the best you can do. I want more than that. He nodded, sweat trickling down his brow. Do you want any of her things? Anything you sent? Not at the moment, no, Olivia said. I hesitate to ask because I have some doubts of your competence now. But was she making any progress? Oh yes, I think in time she could have had a complete recovery, he bragged. What did she recall before this? Olivia asked. Her family, her parents, her brother, her sister. The most tragic event, he replied. She said nothing about me. Not a word during my sessions, and from what I saw from Dr. Sotheby's result, not from him either. Dr. Scallion said. What about him? That's taken care of, he said quickly. Good. I want it all taken care of, Herbert. She turned again and fixed her piercing eyes on him, turning his spine into ice. I mean it. I understand. Is there anything special you want at the gravesite? No, she said. Leave me for a moment, she ordered. Yes, of course, I'm sorry, Mrs. Logan, truly. She said nothing and he left. For a long while she stared at Laura's face. Then she took a short, deep breath and looked up at the ceiling. I'm sorry about you, she said. I know you won't ever understand now, but what I did it for my family. Family's all that matters. Family name, family loyalty. It's who we are when we come into this world and who we are when we leave it. And we must cling tenaciously to it. And the time in between, Laura. She gazed at her granddaughter and thought how beautiful she looked, even in death. Somehow I knew that after you lost your precious Robert, you would never have a really happy moment, Laura. Maybe you weren't so mad, as sick as the doctors think. Maybe you heard him calling. In a strange way, she whispered, I envy you, my dear. She reached out and touched Laura's cold face. Then she turned and left the room. Dr. Scallion escorted her to the front entrance. My lawyer will be in contact with you to be sure all this is done as I instruct, she said. Yes, I understand, Dr. Scallion said with a small nod. I want you to do something else for me. Of course, Dr. Scallion said without hesitation, without hearing it first. I want you to tell that young man, that other patient, something. Yes? I want you to tell him that I don't blame him for anything. Tell him that I thank him for being her friend. Will you do that? I will. It'll help him, Mrs. Logan. It's very kind of you. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for Laura. And, she said, looking at the Rolls Royce, for myself. She started down the steps, and Raymond got out quickly and opened the door. Dr. Scallion wiped his face with his handkerchief as he watched her get into her automobile. When the door closed, he backed up and closed the clinic door. Raymond got in and started the car. It moved slowly toward the driveway. The sun escaped from under another cloud and shot its rays downward over the car, over the grounds, over the ocean, where the waves were now gentle, the whitecaps glimmering. Two terns lifted in the warm air and flew side by side, sweeping down together toward the sea, and then rose toward the sun, as if it were a promise kept between them. And moments later they were gone.